Welcome to Virtual Face-to-Face with President Bruce Jarrell. I'm Alex Lukowski, Executive Director of Media Relations. Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination. Those are the words of former boxer and runner, and also president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, who used sport, in his case rugby, to help unify his deeply racially divided nation. Now, sports is also big business, more than $70 billion a year here in the U.S. And we sometimes live vicariously through sports, reveling in what George Will called vivid examples of excellence. We bond over Purple Fridays or the all too infrequent thrashing of Penn State at the hands of the Snappin' Terps football team. That was 35-19 last weekend for anyone else keeping score. We use sports to help motivate ourselves to good health. And for many of us, of course, whether it's kicking or throwing or smacking a ball or running or biking, skating or snowboarding, sports are just a great way, as my mother would say, to get your yayas out. Without a doubt, this pandemic-dominated year has been like no other for the sporting world. The 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo were rescheduled to 2021. I hope that will happen. The NCAA canceled March Madness for the first time in 81 years. Even the Little League World Series could not be held due to COVID. But at the same time, a whole lot of owners, players, and sports enthusiasts did find ways to continue through a combination of enhanced safety measures and temporary postponements. The NBA played its games in a bubble. The battle over Lord Stanley's Cup was finally finished, but it took until September to do it. A jumbled Triple Crown brought us to the Preakness in October. And Major League Baseball played only about a third of its usual number of games. Now, the NFL, which is going on now, is still trying to keep together a full season. We'll see how that goes. Still, as the number of new COVID cases rises, so too are questions about what's ahead. The NFL, as I mentioned, is going on, but they've already had to postpone at least 15 games due to infection. Even shortened schedules and reduced travel haven't been enough to keep college football players completely out of harm's way. 3 SEC conference games are postponed this weekend, including the highly anticipated Alabama-LSU matchup. And the big shocker on Wednesday, I hate even saying these words, the University of Maryland College Park suspended all football activities as 8 players tested positive to the coronavirus in a 7-day period. The university also canceled Saturday's scheduled game against third-ranked Ohio State, and that game, sadly, will not be rescheduled. So where is the rest of the season going? Can we really do enough to keep players safe? And what's the long-term impact to professional sports and to college sports programs? Today, we're joined by 2 guests who can answer all of those questions and more. Jarrell Pines is president of the University of Maryland College Park, home of the aforementioned Snappin' Terps. And Jerry Sandusky is a sports anchor and reporter with WJZ TV in Baltimore. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let me first mention this program is being recorded and will be posted on the UMB homepage, umaryland.edu. In a little while, you'll have a chance to ask the panel whatever you like. Look for the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Select chat with host and write your question there. When the time comes, we'll call on you by name to ask your question, so please listen up. I'll unmute your mic for you, so all you have to do is ask your question. Now here's our host, University of Maryland Baltimore president, Dr. Bruce Jarrell.
Thank you, Alex, and it's a pleasure to be here, and greetings to all of you out in the audience. I have to begin with an introduction because Mr. Sandusky and President Pines haven't met each other before. So this is a virtual greeting. I'd like to introduce the 2 of you and welcome for being here as well.
Thank you.
And
Great to meet you, Mr. Sandusky. I've seen you on television a lot. I know who you are. You didn't know who I was.
I do know who you are, and it's an honor to meet you, and congratulations and go Terps.
Thank you.
Right. So great introduction, Alex, and a lot going on in this world right now, and sports is one of them. And of course, all of us enjoy our Saturday and Sunday afternoons watching some of these sports. And it's been a little truncated, but still it's going on. And I know Jerry Sandusky is very close to the Ravens and understands how they're managing all this COVID risk. So I wonder, Jerry, if you could give us some insights into how they're doing that, how it's working, and what's your overall assessment of what's going on in terms of protecting players from COVID in the NFL.
So I've been supremely impressed, Dr. Jarrell, with how the NFL has gone about facing coronavirus. And they've done it with two major approaches. One, they have tiered everybody in the organization. You are either tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. Tier 1 would be coaches and players, everybody who's on the field, a part of what you would consider the game day product. Tier 2 would be PR staff, vital personnel in the organization, and people who have to work around, support tier 1. Tier 3 are people like me who would be in the media who are not, or are literally not going to be within 100 yards or farther of anybody in tier 1 or tier 2. So the way they set it up is tier 1 can interact with tier 1 or tier 2. And they all wear these contact tracing bracelets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And those bracelets are amazing, so that if you and I, let's say you're tier 1 and I'm tier 2. If I'm standing within 6 feet of you, as soon as I come within 6 feet, our bracelets start to vibrate, because you know a tier 1 and a tier 2 are too close. If I'm a tier 1 and you're a tier 1, it'll record that you and I spent more than 15 minutes within 6 feet of each other, and you'll both be told tomorrow you can't spend that much time together. So they're using technology to implement common sense. And the common sense piece is, don't be too close to too many people for too often. And don't let people who aren't vital to the endeavor to be interacting with the people who are vital to the endeavor. While I'm the voice of the Ravens, they don't need me to throw or catch a pass on third down, so I don't need to be interacting with tier 1 or tier 2. And so they've done a really good job of that. Now, it's not perfect. They've had 8 players 2 weeks ago in COVID protocol. They've got another player who tested positive today, and there'll probably be other incidents, as we have seen, like that throughout the NFL. But to me, the takeaway is, this is not the last infectious disease that we're going to deal with as humans or as Americans. And this technology, you have to believe, is going to help better prepare us for the next wave of whatever comes.
And it's coming, I think, right now. That's everything I would seem to think. And how are the players adjusting to all of this? Do they like this? Do they hate it? Do they tolerate it? What's the deal?
I think you hit the right word on tolerate. We've seen a handful of players. I think there were about 60 players in the NFL who opted out at the beginning of the year. They took the COVID opt-out, and they chose they didn't want to be a part of it. Either they had pregnant wives, they were concerned about it, they had high-risk diabetes in the family, for whatever reason. I think that the league was very fair in how they handled that, and no player was stigmatized for opting out.
Right.
The players who are in it, the thing you have to understand about a team is that if you are on a good team, you always put the team ahead of yourself. And clearly this is one of those instances where it's a hassle. Everything's a hassle. You've got to get your nose swabbed every single day if you're tier 1. You have to go through protocol. You've got to wear the bracelet. You've got to really reduce your socialization. You've got to make a lot of sacrifices. But as we all know, the essence of team sports is sacrificing your individual wants for the greater good. So while this has been a very trying journey, it has also been the very essence of what team sports is all about, and that is sacrifice.
Thank you for that. I want to remind the participants out in the audience that Jerry and President Pines will be available to answer questions. So make sure you get your questions in to Alex right away. Now, President Pines, before I get into the College Park program, you have a son who's playing professional sports in a bubble. Could you tell us how that works and how he's liking that?
So yes, my son is a professional player for DC United. His name is Donovan Pines. And as you may recall, in the Major League Soccer, they created a bubble to restart their league, and they brought everyone down to Orlando, kind of similar to the NBA and the NWBA, the Women's League. And essentially, people were in a resort. All the teams were at literally the same resort, but isolated from one another. And similar to what Mr. Sandusky said, they were tested every day, but they did not have the bracelets to ensure that they were not coming in contact with tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 folks. They were simply physically isolated from other people in the resort. Not even were they allowed to have interactions with other teams and teammates from other teams. They could only have interactions with their own team, coaches, training staff, and that kept them all safe. And then, of course, game day, they had to obviously be tested again, and then to be allowed to be a clean playing field to occur. The challenge, my son, I could talk to him every day literally about this. And as Mr. Sandusky also said, they tolerated it. It was tough for them. No families are allowed in the resort, no departures from the resort. You can imagine now being somewhere for 3 or 4 weeks and having to endure that, not having any family members, not being able to interface with your fellow teams of other teams in the MLS, and just dealing with your own team and literally confined to the hotel. They learn to deal with it. They learn to tolerate it, but they love their sport, and they wanted to play, so they were willing to do it because they love their sport. And so he was able to tolerate it, and it all went well. And then as they transitioned out of the bubble, I think it was even more difficult when they got back to their locales, because then everything had to be really, scheduled. They had to really stay away from their friends when they got back to their home areas. So it got even a little bit more difficult when they came back home.
Wow, that seems pretty difficult to live with. But I guess if you really want to play the game, that's what you do.
That's what you do, and they all do.
So for your football team, you're testing every day, and yet you had to make a tough decision yesterday. Tell us a little bit about what you had to go through there.
Yes, let me just take you back to the summer and a couple of steps before we get to yesterday's decision. So, if you may recall, the Big Ten, along with the Pac-12, but I'll just deal specifically with the Big Ten presidents and chancellors and the entire medical community of the Big Ten. There are many sports medicine doctors, as well as cardiologists, as well as epidemiologists. And we back then had made a decision in early August to forego fall sports. And that's because we did not have consistent testing protocols, contact tracing protocols that Mr. Sandusky alluded to. And we had differences in how we administered tests at the 14 institutions across the Big Ten. And we were like, how are we going to make this work? We don't have the money that the NFL has or the professional leagues have to be able to do the bubble in College Park or in Ann Arbor. We had to figure out an approach that was going to work for college students. And at that time, the testing was still evolving. So then fast forward 6 weeks after that first week of August, and somewhere in the second week of September, we could now make an affirmative decision about actually having daily testing, daily antigen testing with a confirmation PCR testing if you tested positive to create a clean practice field for fall sports. And then of course, a clean playing field. So we have been doing that now since September 10th, if I recall correctly, and everything was going fine. We were able to really have no positives for most of those cases, for most of those weeks. And then we came back from the Penn State game, and we still don't know exactly how it happened. But we obviously discovered on Monday of this week, 4 of our student athletes tested positive. Then an additional 2 on Tuesday, then an additional 2 on Wednesday. And then we realized that we had a bigger problem. And then, of course, the contact tracing, as Mr. Sandusky alluded to, obviously they're very in close proximity, all the student athletes. And so we know that the contact tracing was probably going to affect probably half of our team. And so at that point, we had to really think through this carefully and say, well, out of an abundance of caution to our student athletes, to our staff, to Ohio State, that it's not in the best interest that we play football this Saturday. We're all upset. Nobody could be more upset than me. Nobody could be more upset than our athletic director or our coaches and our players. But it's the right thing to do to ensure the health and safety and well-being of our students and our staff and our coaches. And so that's the decision we made. And obviously we had to call our colleagues at Ohio State to let them know early. And then we issued a joint press release, roughly 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, 1:30 Central Time, jointly with the Big Ten, University of Maryland, and Ohio State, all at the same time out to our community. So that's kind of what happened. And we're in a pause mode now for the next 4 or 5 days. And then we're testing every day to make sure that we understand the prevalence of COVID on the team.
Thank you. And I want to remind our participants to send in questions to Alex. We're waiting. So one of the criticisms or complaints I've heard is, oh, it's just about the money. How do you view that statement relative to College Park, particularly football?
Well, I mean, I would say to them that if it was just about the money, The first decision that we made as a collective group of presidents and chancellors was to postpone fall sports for the same reason that I've already alluded to, that the medical protocols were not in place, that there was non-uniformity across 14 institutions, and that we could not ensure that we could protect our student athletes. And that was in early August. And so if money was the only reason why we made an affirmative decision, that's incorrect as well. We did it strictly based on the medical protocol. And as you all are possibly aware of, we're playing a reduced schedule, which is only 8 games instead of 11 or 12 games that we would play on a normal. That's already foregoing at least 3 to 4 games of money. We are playing in empty stadiums because we feel that it's the best way to keep everyone safe. And the Big Ten has all agreed to that across the Big Ten. And similar to what Mr. Sandusky referred to as this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level, it's similar in college. We have a tier 1 and a tier 2, but because there's no tier 3, that is, there's no fans. It's just tier 1 and tier 2, that as it is at College Park. And so in that, with no fans, therefore you're losing additional revenue. So it's not about the revenue. It's about, are we doing the right thing for our student athletes and for our coaches and our training staff and for everyone involved. And sports is, as for previously alluded to, is an important aspect of human life, and it brings joy and passion and brings people together. And our community and the United States enjoys this as a pastime. And so, but we wanted to make sure that in order to execute it, that it was going to be safe. And so I think that's what we're doing. And it is costing us negatively financially for not having play a full schedule and not also having people in the stands.
Right.
And Dr. Jarrell, if I can interject, I
Please,
think the
Jerry,
Big
yes.
Ten as a conference and as a group of presidents deserve a lot of credit. The ACC and the SEC came out right out of the gate and they said, we're playing and, rules be darned and whatever happens, happens. We're going full steam ahead. And, that was kind of like the Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders and all, like, wait a second, this is a global pandemic. The Big Ten deserves credit because they did put on the brakes. They didn't try to be first out on the field. They have not put the dollars first, and they have put the students first. I mean, look, if you're putting the dollars first, Maryland's playing Ohio State, and you just sit in the stands in the president's box with your fingers crossed and you hope nothing gets worse. Instead, they put aside the biggest game Maryland has had on the football field since joining the Big Ten. They stepped out of the national spotlight. They put the student athletes first. And I know that's not the popular thing to say, but the presidents did the right thing. And that conference should feel good about the fact that, look, this is not going to be a clean season. It's not going to be the season to remember. It's not going to be a Disney movie. It's a pandemic, and they're treating it as such, and they should be applauded for that.
Yeah, and thanks for that comment. If you watch some of those SEC games, there's an awful lot of people in the stands, an awful lot of people jumping up and down without masks and hugging one another. It's a very different environment when you watch those games. At least that's my perception. Jerry, how has this changed the game? You don't have fans. You have this artificial audience out there coming through the audio. Well, what's changed?
So I think what has changed is probably an elevated appreciation for the fans as a partner to the game itself. The game is a beautiful thing and fans are a beautiful thing. But like most relationships, the magic is how the two interconnect and how the two relate. When you watch players run out onto the field in a completely empty stadium, it's lifeless. And you can have all the pyrotechnics and the steam you want. The players just kind of run out on the field and they play the game, and they play it like professionals. They play it with heart and passion and execution. But even when there's 4,000 fans in the stands, they run out of the tunnel and there's a lilt in their step and they're pumping up their fist into the air. And you can feel the excitement after a big play. You can feel the momentum shift after a bad play. And you remember that the emotional aspect is really the power of sport. It's what draws us together. At this time of the year, politics divides us. Religion can kind of put us in our own camps. Economics can separate us into tiers. But sport has the power to bring us all together and hold each other's hands. I becomes we, and we just join together. And albeit for a couple of hours a week, it's still pretty magical. And when you take the fans out of the equation, you lose a lot of that magic.
Yeah, well, it shows on Sunday, that's for sure. Alex, I hear you've got a few questions. Why don't we start with one or two of them?
Absolutely. Let's go to Becky Sorrell and pharmacy. Becky, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Hi,
So
Becky.
my question is about youth sports. What are your thoughts on youth sports like the rec, travel, and club teams that have been practicing and playing games with non-mask players, given that they don't have the mitigation resources that professional teams have?
So I'll take it first, Becky. Two words come to mind: lunacy and idiocy. I just can't believe parents are putting their kids at that level of risk. I've had the great privilege of raising two children with my wife, and my kids played Little League sports. And I even coached Little League sports for a long time. I coached Little League baseball. On the first day of practice, I would bring all the players and the coaches together, and I would give them this quick, abbreviated speech. None of you are playing pro sports. The odds tell me none of you are playing it. So don't wait until you're in the pros to start having fun. As a matter of fact, the farther you go in sports, the less fun it is, and the more it becomes a business. But in reality, with a global pandemic, I wouldn't let anybody, on a field with my kids who doesn't have a mask on. I wouldn't let them run around. You're going to risk your child's health for what? So that they can be the leading scorer in the neighborhood soccer league? That's insanity. I think we all need the big picture of it is a global pandemic, but it's temporary. We'll have Little League next year or in 18 months, but right now we can't have it. Now, my father fought in World War II, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have a lot of Little League while we were fighting the Germans because there was a higher priority. We have to just unify around the higher priority. And I think if we do that, sports is about teaching our kids vital lessons. What's wrong with teaching our children the priority that other people's health is more important than you scoring a goal on Saturday afternoon?
President Pines, you want to add anything to that?
There's nothing more to add. I agree with Mr. Sandusky 1000%. I had a couple of nephews who are 10 and 11, and they went out into a soccer tournament, and I was just shaking my head. There was no testing. There was no contact tracing. Yes, young people are rather invincible. And yes, young people have a lower subsistence to the virus, but that doesn't mean that an individual won't be affected. So I agree with Mr. Sandusky's thinking about this, that it shouldn't be happening without testing protocols and contact tracing protocols in place.
And of course, if they bring it home to you or me,
Yeah,
it's higher risk for us.
exactly.
At least for me, it is.
Me too.
You're
me
my
too.
Okay. Okay, Alex, got another one?
Well, let me just ask very quickly, though, because we talked about this before the show. You do have kids who are in high school who are hoping that their performance is going to get them to your university. How is your university? How do you think the other universities are going to judge these players who aren't getting the chance, for good reason, not getting the chance to show what they can do this year and maybe next year?
If I can answer that first. So it's interesting you asked that question. I think there is a way to do it. You know how the NFL has a combine, soccer has a combine. Universities have showcases for high school students. I think there's a way to do it and keep it clean, have them all tested as they arrive in some environment, and then create a same thing, clean practice field, clean playing field, and then the scouts would have to get tested and they can make an assessment of whether that kid can come to your college or not. I think there's a way to do it. We were just having this conversation actually yesterday with our athletic director about all the sports, right? And then we were trying to figure out what should we be doing in collaboration with other universities to create a showcase that's clean, that allows players who are in high school to showcase their talents so that universities can make affirmative offer decisions, right? So I think you're going to see some of that start to emerge as we get further into this season and other seasons. And so I know it's true for the professional sports, so I know it's doable. So it could be done for high school as well.
Jerry, anything to add to that?
Well, and I love that thinking because it will go on long after the pandemic. It's actually a much more sane way to recruit because now you're bringing together what you believe to be the pool of talent and they start to compete against each other. The NFL does that with the combine, as President Pines referred to. And it's one thing to judge talent when it's superior talent against inferior talent, which is really what you usually have with Division I players when they're in high school. But when you put them together on the same field, you'll find out who really does belong in Maryland and who belongs at Towson. I'm a Towson alum. I'm not picking on them, but that's a little lower level. Who belongs at Michigan and who belongs at the community college. You'll find that by doing the type of combines that President Pines is talking about. And to me, the beauty of that is that's the way it will evolve. So not that we look at this pandemic as any kind of hidden blessing, but if you approach it, I call it opportunity thinking. Starts as a problem, but you look for the opportunity. College sports can evolve in a positive way through measures like that.
Yeah, that's a great word. I haven't heard that word before. I'll have to look that up.
No, you won't find it. I invented it.
It's not a Scrabble word. All right, we have Dan Mullins with the next question. Dan, are you there?
Yes, thanks very much. First, thanks for the conversation. Wonderful chat today. For President Pines, I imagine it's challenging being a campus president these days, and I'm wondering how other students have responded to the decisions about sports versus other aspects of college life, on your campuses or others. And, are other student groups requesting consideration of COVID-19 policies for their activities to try to find solutions? Or, has the sport set in motion requests for other things? And what are you doing in that area?
Yeah, great question. This came up just as we were thinking about the differential treatment of students and student athletes as it relates to testing. And so the difference is we, University of Maryland, are asking the student athletes to play and represent the university. Other students, we're not asking them to do any of that. So they fall underneath the standard testing protocol that is safe to keep our campus safe, which is typically testing every week instead of every day. However, the student athletes is different. We're asking them to play for the University of Maryland. We're asking them to represent the University of Maryland, which means we're also asking them to violate our social distancing criteria of 6 feet or more. And when we do that, especially for contact sports, we must do something different and unique for them. So that's why it's differentiated. So that's why we test all of our student athletes every day with the antigen test, with a confirmation PCR test if they test positive, because that's what our medical protocol tells us to do when you're going to have that kind of contact relationship in sports. The difference with the other students, we're not asking them to do recreation sports. We're not asking them to represent the university. Therefore, they fall under a different testing protocol, and that's why it can be differentiated that way. So that's how I would answer your question.
Yeah, it's more than less social distancing. There's also interaction there, isn't there?
That's right.
It's a physical game. It's a physical game. Alex?
All right, we have another question from Robin Reed. Robin, go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. So mine's a little bit different. Athletes often deal with adversity under all kinds of situations, whether it's preparing for an ultramarathon or the disappointing and devastating, such as an injury that ends their season and they've got to then return to competitive level, or this year, pandemic that ends a season and people need to, from Olympic athletes to our very own Maryland athletes, need to maintain some kind of a psychology and and physical readiness for competition level fitness. So what kinds of things do athletes do to successfully navigate those adversities? And is there anything that we can take from that, especially in the psychology part, I would say, is there anything we can take from that to apply to what we are all doing, trying to live through the pandemic and stay, keep everything in our lives balanced and moving forward too?
So I'll take that first. I think the single biggest thing athletes and coaches have learned to do that we can all adjust to is shorten your horizon. But what I mean by that is, let's take a pre-pandemic football season. In the NFL, in August, you're going to be in training camp. In September, the regular season is going to begin. In January, the playoffs are going to begin. You have to win 10 games to get there. You see the whole season play out before the first day you step onto the practice field. Well, now in 2020, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if some team's going to have 20 players test positive and the game's going to get moved to Tuesday night. We've seen games moved from Sunday to Monday, Monday to Tuesday. We've seen practices eliminated. We've seen meetings moved from in the facility to Zoom. and it happens like that. And so the way you have to adjust is you have to shorten your horizon and don't think about the way a season normally plays out, but focus on what can I do today to put myself in position to be in position to succeed tomorrow. That's as far as you can look out. And so instead of looking out over weeks and months and half of a year, you look out over hours. And that's the single biggest adjustment coaches and players have had to make because they know I can't plan for 6 weeks. In 6 hours, everything could change, and I have to be flexible and nimble. And if I am, I might be able to survive the challenge that awaits me in 6 hours so that I can be in play in 12 hours, in 18 hours. And I think if we all sort of take that approach, we'll recognize that the pandemic doesn't care about our fourth quarter goals. It doesn't care about our fourth quarter revenue projections. It doesn't care about the fact that you celebrated a milestone and want to sell and want to have a big party. The pandemic doesn't care. The pandemic is there. And so we have to shorten our horizon so that we can stay flexible hour to hour, day to day, and eventually we'll get to the last day of this challenge.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was in Japan in January, and of course, the Olympics were supposed to happen in Japan this year, and then we came back and we're dealing with our student athletes, who many are in Olympic sports, and some will be Olympians, and sort of send us these advice about taking it 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time is absolutely true. Because in a given day, something bad could happen relative to your trainer could catch COVID. And so we are allowing our student athletes to go under the same testing protocol, those who are vying for the Olympics or in Olympic sports. So they go under the same testing protocol. They train every day with their coaches and trainers who go on the same protocol. But again, we even had a situation in the summer where so many people tested positive on our various teams that we literally had to shut down all of athletics for literally a week, which means that all the student athletes who were in the Olympic training sports also had to be shut down, and they had to deal with that mentally. So we also have increased our mental health support for these students and for the student athletes on the University of Maryland. We've added an additional $1 million or more money for personnel to help support both our students and our student athletes as they go through these difficult, challenging, uncertain times as it relates to COVID and other things. So it is something that is top of mind for all of us.
Yeah, I want to remind our audience to keep your questions coming in. Alex has got a list, but I need more of them too. So I have a question for both of you. My son has a couple of daughters, and he comes to College Park football games, and he comes to Ravens games, and there's basketball games and stuff like that. So what's going to happen to the next generation of sports fans? Is this going to be impeded, or you think they'll just catch up and we're just keeping it suppressed right this minute?
So I've felt this way for years before the pandemic. I think what you will see moving forward post-pandemic will be smaller stadiums.
Yeah.
The age of 100,000 person stadium, I think, has long passed us for a couple of reasons. One, we recognize how easy it is to transmit something that we didn't even know about a year before. So who knows what's coming down the pike in 2022, right? So the other is the financial aspect of it. It costs a lot of money to build stadiums. If the University of Maryland had to go out and build another arena, that's a lot of money, and it's a fight politically where you're going to get the money. So build smaller arenas, build smaller stadiums. You'll have smaller gatherings. You'll keep people healthier. You'll still have that community hub that brings people together. But I don't think we're going to see 70, 80, 90,000 seat stadiums being built after this.
Yeah, I agree. And I think being an engineer that I am, I think technology will play a significant role. And I think it's being accelerated. I know it's being worked on right now because I know a couple of startups and other firms that are working with the NFL and some other entities, NBA as well, to enhance the fan experience remotely, where the fan is not necessarily physically at the game, but is in some sense digitally at the game, but in a much more engaged environment that's virtual through virtual reality. One of the interesting things that I'm sure Mr. Sandusky would agree with me, because this has happened in MLS and I know it to be true, is that when you don't have fans, you hear everything. You literally hear players talking to players. You hear coaches talking to players. I mean, for the first time for my own son, I heard the coach talk to him in the game, and I heard exactly what he said. I could never hear that when I'm at the game. I could never hear that normally when I was on television or watching the game on television. But I heard exactly what he said to them. I heard what the players were saying to each other, and I actually never heard that in professional soccer before. But it really does add value to the game and how it's being played and managed. And so I think there's some nuances here, technology-wise, that we're going to see evolve that will make the game day experience for the fan remotely it may be as good or better than being in the stands themselves. So I think technology is going to really allow for some innovations.
So I'm going to watch him with goggles. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe.
Maybe.
It could be one of your options. I mean,
Exactly.
look,
Yeah.
it was 2 years ago, the Ravens played out in Los Angeles against the Chargers. And the Chargers, at the time, before they moved into their new stadium, were playing in the MLS soccer stadium in Los Angeles. And it seated about 22,000 people. And I remember hearing the Chargers were going to do that. My initial thought was, this is ludicrous. And then when I got out there, it struck me, this is all you need.
Yeah.
They had enough fans for it to look like a packed stadium on television, which is the big cash driver for the NFL to begin with. The fans were right on top of the field, which created this great intimate atmosphere. And the top layer of the stadium still had skyboxes. So you had everything you still needed, but you needed less space to pull it off. It's easier to keep 22,000 people healthy than 80,000 people. It still looked good on television, which is, again, the biggest revenue source. To me, that's the model to go with for the future.
Yeah, well, we've been focused on football. Of course, basketball is a lot closer to that, isn't it?
17, 18,000. But even that, we can see smaller crowds, because what you're going to see, and what I've had a conversation with a lot of architects during the pandemic. What you're going to see post-pandemic is people want space. Even in arenas, even in offices, even in urban environments, space is now the new gold. And so if you are at a game, you might not be able to afford a skybox, but you still want more than just being completely surrounded by everybody. And so the challenge, architecturally, engineering, financially, as well as from a sports standard, is how do you give people a little bit more space for their dollar while maintaining the integrity of the atmosphere and the energy that makes it so special? And here's what our history has taught us. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. I agree, Mr. Stendos. He's dead on, because we have about 15% of our classes that are in person. And I've gone to a couple of those classes, and they're socially distant. People are at least 6 to 10 feet away. They have to wear their mask while they're sitting in the lecture hall. To a person, each of the students has told me they still love coming to the in-person class because they still feel that the delivery of the content is better and the educational experience is better than completely virtual. But it's also still safe because they've got space away from everyone else. And even though it's a reduced number of people in a room that normally would have housed, let's say 200 people, but only has 30 people, they want to be in person to get that in-person experience. So,
Well, as President Pines will agree with me, we have funded a virtual reality project jointly between the two universities, and that project is aimed at helping, in this particular case, trauma surgeons visualize parts of a patient using ultrasound, and to be able to see the image on a split screen wearing goggles so that you can see the patient and also see the inside part that you need to see. That's pretty exciting. And of course, this is simply an extension. It's just a little scary to me that I'll be able to hear what the coaches are saying. That's going to take some cleanup, I have a feeling.
Yeah, it will not only take some cleanup, don't get used to it, because remember, in sports, it's all about action and reaction.
Yeah.
And what most people probably don't realize, everybody knows that the teams watch game tape of each other, but what most people don't realize is, at least in the NFL, and I suspect at the college level too, coaches watch the broadcast of their opponent's game as well for that very reason, so that they can hear what the quarterback's saying and see if they can pick up what the coaches are saying, so that they understand the calls that teams and opponents are making at the line of scrimmage. They're always looking for that competitive edge. So now that everybody realizes you can hear each other, don't be surprised if they start speaking a different language, if they start using fake words, crazy different terminology that's designed to trick their opponent, because it's an endless chess match.
Crazy. That's just crazy. Keep your questions coming. Alex, you got another one there?
Sure. Raymond Taylor is concerned about the college athletes and what's going to happen to them in their college careers. Raymond, are you here?
I am here.
Go ahead,
Good
sir.
afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I will just say, first and foremost, I'm a lifelong Terps fan. I'm going way back to the days of Len Bias, so I'm showing my age, but I'm showing my dedication too. So go Terps. And
Wait a
Mr.
second, I have to interrupt
Sandusky.
you. What do you mean way back? That's not that long ago. What are you talking about? I'm sorry, go on, sir.
All right, I'll be
Go.
quiet now. But my question is two-part, actually. First question is, if the levels of COVID infections persist, do you expect colleges to continue to grant extra years of eligibility to student athletes? And secondly, also, college sports schedules, do you expect them to change in terms of typical fall sports now becoming spring sports and et cetera, et cetera? Thank you.
Yeah, these are both great questions. I'll try to tackle the first one. I can only tackle the first one because I know what the ruling is for this year. I mean, because we're in such an unusual year of the virus, they've added an extra year of eligibility for players who are in this situation. Because as Mr. Sandusky mentioned, for the professional players, some of them opted out, but also some of the college players opted out. And they want another opportunity to be able to compete in their sport. And they deserve that right. Even those that are even playing today, if something happens and a lot of games are canceled, they deserve the right to play again next year if they can get that extra year. How it goes forward, I don't know. I think the NCAA is in a bind because there's only a finite number of student scholarships. So I think it will be a financial problem going forward. And in terms of the movement of fall sports to spring, I think in this unusual year, obviously the way college sports has been financed, which is predominantly by basketball and football revenue to fund the other sports, this year made sense to move some fall sports like field hockey, volleyball, and a couple of other soccer, men and women's soccer, to the spring. I don't think that's going to happen in the future, but I think it's only in this particular year. And then there was, as you know, some discussion about moving football into winter/spring. And as you can tell, all the colleges were against that. And that's why we have fall sports happening now, because fall football is because it pushes up against the training for the spring and the turnaround time on the human body, even though these folks are only 18 to 24 years of age, would have been extremely tough to play another season in the same year after playing a spring season. So
there's a great quote from the book of Ecclesiastes that there's a time for all things under the sun, a time for sowing, a time for reaping, a time for living, and a time for dying. There is a season for all things in life. And COVID has interrupted that, but we cannot fight the fact that there is a season for all things. And sometimes when that's not your season, it's time to lie fallow and allow time to take care of itself. And we will march on. We will resume. We'll get through it.
But there must be an awful lot of wear and tear on these athletes from even week to week and year to year.
Oh,
yeah,
I mean, look, I've heard it said that if you play in a football game at either Division I or the NFL, it's about the equivalent on your body of being in 7 car accidents at 35 miles an hour in the same day.
yeah.
So it's a concussive experience for your body, to say the least.
Yeah, and I think it's even more so with the mental aspect of this year. I mean, it's just like, us being on this, WebEx call, people will use the term, telework is real work. So just treat it the same way. Telework is real work, right? And so now, sports is real sports, but the added uncertainty and stress of COVID makes it even more stressful and more taxing for both the human body and the mental and the brain. And so I think it's a tough year for all athletes, whether it's college or professional.
Gotcha. Alex, there was a second part to his question. Did you catch it?
No, I think you answered it. I remember thinking that you covered that. Right. We have a number of comments about sports at different times, including one that the season for hockey is apparently August and September, but the world is upside down. We have an anonymous question about lower tier sports. They're always worried that, and you mentioned some of them, Dr. Pines, like wrestling, swimming, things that don't have a professional track. Are they at risk of being cut back? Because the money to do all this testing and all these safety measures being implemented at stadiums and so forth, it's got to come from somewhere. Are they at risk?
Not at Maryland, not at this time. We did push them all back into the winter and spring so that we could generate a little bit of revenue from football and other sports. but even that's not going to offset this particular year. So, but we have made no decisions to cancel any Olympic sports or other sports, intercollegiate sports at University of Maryland, and many schools have not done that. Which it's just right now we know it's a bad year financially, but we know that these sports mean a lot to these student athletes, and especially those who are potentially going to be training for the Olympics.
I know a few people are having some connectivity issues with their WebEx, so they're now texting me with questions. And one of the questions that we got, and I think President Pines, this is more for you. You've got student athletes, and of course they have academic careers, don't they? And how is all this affecting their academic careers? Any insights into that?
So, it's interesting you asked that question because, what's really kind of helped them this year is because we, the Big Ten, postponed fall sports to October, they got a whole 5 weeks in without having games, right? Football games. And all the other student athletes who got postponed to the spring, they are just working on their academics. So in fact, it's actually working out pretty well from a virtual learning perspective and also from a broad learning engagement perspective for our student athletes and for our football players. I have not heard any complaints from our staff related to this issue for all of our athletes and students involved. But I think that extra delay did help their academics because they can only focus on the one thing rather. But so it's interesting. My son was always a person who needed the balance. He needed to be playing sports and to be doing academics, so it made him a better student. It allowed him to focus more. So there are some student athletes who require the parallel processing of having to play their sports and focus their time management so they can do their academics really well. And that's probably typically of some of our students as well right now.
And Dr. Jarrell, I know the NCAA has done studies for years and has discovered something that would seem counterintuitive, that the majority of NCAA athletes get better grades when their sport is in season than when they are off season because of the discipline required. And something is going on here, by the way, during the pandemic that we just experienced. So some of the people who would normally be watching this WebEx were having technology issues. So what did they do? Did they just forget about it, move on? No, they adapted. Right. They texted Dr. Jarrell and they found a way to get through. And you know what?
Right.
That's what today's college students are going to do. Yep. We're all thinking of college the way we were at 18 years old. But if you're an 18-year-old freshman, this is the experience and you find the way through. Yep. There's something in physiology that I love called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands. It's why your body gets bigger when you lift weights. Yeah. It's why if you have an injury to your left leg, your right leg gets stronger. Your body learns how to adapt. Young people are the most adaptive of all of God's organisms. They will actually not only get through this, but they're the ones who will help the rest of us figure out ways through and get to the other end of this pandemic and not merely survive, but find ways to thrive and get better.
Yeah, great analogy. Another question that came through to me was President Pines, you may remember, 10 years ago, there were a number of sports that you took, not you, that were taken out of the College Park repertoire, competitive sports. And I don't recall what happened, whether they were put back in or not. Do you see a weeding out, if that's the right term? That's probably a horrible term. Do you see that some sports will fall off the collegiate competitive schedule?
I think it's already happened. So at some institutions, Stanford had 30 plus intercollegiate sports, and I think they're down to 23 or 24. They made that decision based on what was happening to them and their financial situation. We, President Lowe, the president before me in 2010, 2009, 2010, had to make this very difficult decision back then because of the financial problem that athletics had for many years I think he had to get rid of 4 to 6 intercollegiate athletics, which was, I think, swimming and diving, gymnastics, and a couple others. Track and field was on that list, but they fought back and privately fundraised to keep track and field going here at Maryland. But yes, it was a very difficult, trying time, especially for our student athletes who had come to Maryland and play those sports. And we got through it all, but I don't want to ever do that to any of our student athletes ever again. I think we're fine. So as I said, we have no intention of reducing any of our intercollegiate sports, and we will get through this virus, and we'll get through it also financially.
Yeah. Jerry, you're hearing anything on that front?
No, I think we've seen a lot of the fallout. I think Furman canceled their football program. President Pines mentioned Stanford. We've seen a lot of schools have to trim back because, look, at the end of the day, sports at the collegiate level is still a business in terms of cash revenues and cash expenses. You have to pay for these. And the two big drivers in college sports tend to be men's basketball and college football. Now, there are programs like Maryland's women's basketball is very strong, UConn, Tennessee, they can be cash flow positive. But for the most part, it is those two sports that generate the revenue for the other sports. So when the revenue disappears, the expenses don't disappear for the other sports. And this becomes really a function of time. So you're looking at the vaccine arriving, hopefully April, May, that could save a lot of these sports, because if the pandemic were to stretch over 3 years, you'd see a lot of these sports have to disappear.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are several vaccine candidates on the horizon. And I think we're all optimistic. There will be a supply and demand problem because to produce these, it's going to take a trick. But obviously that'll have an impact when those become available. Another question that I got sent on my text had to do with ticket prices. Now, I haven't bought a Ravens ticket lately, but I think they're probably expensive. Now, if we de-densify the stadium, what do you think is going to happen there? Or is this all going to be driven by television revenue?
Well, the thing you have to keep in mind with the NFL is 3/4 of the NFL revenue is TV revenue. So no matter what, at the end of the day, that's why the NFL was able to go forward with its season much more easily than, say, college sports could. You know, when you look at what college sports faces, even at the University of Maryland or at Michigan or Ohio State or USC, the vast majority of your sports are expense sports. They don't bring in revenue. And so they actually cost the university money. And that's not criticism, it's reality. With the NFL, 3/4 of the league revenue is driven just by television. Before anybody turns the lights on at the team facilities, they've made 3/4 of their revenue. So in the future, if you shrink the size of stadiums, yeah, you probably do expand the ticket price, and you probably will wind up eliminating the upper deck, and you might create some levels of economics that aren't appealing to everybody. But you know what? In sports, you never satisfy anybody anyway. And you have to ask yourself, which is more appealing? A sold out 30,000 seat stadium or a 70,000 seat stadium with 30,000 people sitting in it and 40,000 empty seats? And those are all future decisions that sports have to make. But for the NFL, for most major league sports, TV is the cash register.
Gotcha. That's less so for you, President Pines, but still true.
I mean, Jerry said it best. I mean, for colleges, it's dominated by the revenue from football and second by basketball. There's no question about that. And, one university president told me and said, look, sports are non-essential part of the business of the university. And I would also say that, the University of Maryland, our athletic department is 5% of our total budget. But it consumes, I would say, it's consumed 30 or 40% of my time.
Yeah.
During this year, right? And I only started on July 1st. And I've been amazed by that, by the amount of time that is spent to ensure safety, health, because of the COVID, but also to communicate to our various constituents who are very passionate about decisions that we make. And I'm amazed by that part of our process, that for a non-essential activity that, yes, brings great Maryland pride, great Maryland honor, is sort of, as the previous president used to say, the front porch of the university. It's something that everyone rallies around. It's amazing the level of interest in sports. It's unbelievable to me. And I don't think I ever could truly understand that when I was a dean of engineering, but I totally understand it as a president. And I love the passion. It's great, but sometimes it's misguided. And right. And we have to, I want people to know that it's very important that It's a non-essential activity. It's a great activity, but the health and safety of all the people are more important than playing the game all the time. And people just have to remember that.
And I'll give you some unsolicited advice in terms of being a president and thinking of your sports department. Don't think of it as sports. Think of it as your marketing department.
True.
Because
True.
you have this amazing engineering school, you have this amazing business school, you have this amazing list of schools that people don't rally around necessarily on a Saturday afternoon. But another track record for the NCAA, teams that make it to the Final Four watch donations to the university usually double and triple.
True.
And that is nothing more than a function of marketing. Why was everybody so excited about the Ohio State game? They were number 3. You beat Penn State, national spotlight. That's not sports. That's marketing.
That's marketing. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look at what happened with UMBC winning a game in the tournament.
That's
Had
true.
a huge impact on them, which is a great thing. One of our listeners who is not able to get in, who texted me, wanted to know, was the front porch going to change, Jarrell? Was that going to be something different in the future?
You mean, is there going to be a different front porch?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think whatever builds Maryland pride will always be the front-facing thing that people will remember. In some cases, it's sports. In some cases, it's winning a Nobel Prize in chemistry or in physics. But I'm all for whatever markets our institution and builds our reputation and becomes the new front porch. So it doesn't always have to be sports. When we won the solar decathlon in 2011, that became the front porch for the university and it was a proud moment because it was like a sporting event. It was competition. It was excellence, all achieved by being rated the #1 university that built a net zero off the grid home that involved 250 students, faculty, and staff. That was, to me, my proudest moment as a University of Maryland citizen, next to winning the national championship in men and women's basketball. So
yeah. We're just about out of time. I do want to comment that I am pleased to say that I do not spend 40% of my time on athletics at UMB. I don't think that's going to change. So we have a much different life, but it's a different life for sure. Jerry and Darrell, I just want to thank you immensely for this. This has been a lot of fun. We should do this again,
yes.
12 months from now when the world has changed yet again, to see what's our front porch and how are we filling our stadiums. But I want to thank you for this. It was wonderful time. And I'm sure I'll continue to get questions on my cell phone. Too late, but that's okay. So in any event, any parting comments or anything?
Go Terps.
Go Terps.
Go Terps. Be patient and understand that if we approach this as a short-term problem that leads to a long-term opportunity, much like every other challenge sports presents to the athletes, the coaches, and the fans, this can actually be something that makes us better post-pandemic, and that's what I'm a fan of.
Yep. Well, I hope you're right. I think you will be. So thank you all. Thank you in our audience. A great time. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you, Bruce.